Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandria Archives, the early morning radio show for the South's weirdest university. Visit alexandriaarchives.com today to find out more about the school where running into ghosts, vampires, and things that go bump in the night is just another day on campus. That's alexandriaarchives.com. Go Wendigos. I guess someone was bound to try it at some point. No one ever said mosaics had to be flesh and blood, after all. Still, we're supposed to be human, sort of. I'm not sure today's experiment met that requirement. Even so, I'm glad they got away. Good for them. This is Spines. Shan and I were out chasing a lead when we got a call from Miranda about some mosaics. "Get back to the burrow," she said. "Winry found something." I asked her what it was. I could hear her irritation through the phone. "Hell if I know," she said. "I'm a cell biologist, not a programmer." Then she hung up. Winry was practically levitating when we got there. She was so worked up. "So take a look," she said, waving at her monitors. Then she started spouting something about social media algorithms and coding and some other nonsense. I lost her after a sentence or two. Finally, Shan laid a hand on her arm, and that touch cut her off mid-sentence. "Winry," Shan said, "I'm half vegetation. Computers make me uneasy under the best of circumstances. Could you please explain it in simpler terms?" Winry blushed and stammered and said she'd try. It took a couple tries and some analogies that probably dumbed it down a whole lot for us, but here's what she finally managed to get across. The Seekers keep track of social media profiles of gifted people, potential tiles. Not only that, they pull some shady strings to keep track of their emails, their web browsing, stuff like that. NSA shit. "That's fucked up," I said to Miranda, who'd been hanging back in the corner with her arms folded. "You're right," she said. "We'll stop as soon as the fate of the world is no longer at stake." I didn't really know what to say to that. Anyway, here's the rest of what Winry had to say. They keep track of thousands of social media profiles, so, of course, no one would have the time to read them every day or even every week. But Winry had programs and spyware and things that would alert her if something out of character happened, something that would be weird for those people. Which is what happened a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, 8 people's online existence vanished. Their Facebook pages, Twitter, Instagram, their email accounts, the stupid comments they left on forums, everything. They were just gone. At least, that's what Winry thought at first. She slid back and forth between different monitors on her desk chair, talking and typing at the same time. But then I looked closer and I found fragments of all 8 profiles. Comments that matched old tweets, unique word combinations in a Facebook post, things that definitely belonged to those 8 people. I exchanged a glance with Shan, then Miranda. We all know the significance of the number 8. "Okay," I said. "So someone managed to create a mosaic. These 8 are the tiles. So the mosaic deleted the old accounts and made its own? And we're seeing the composite personalities?" Winry was already shaking her head before I was done speaking. "No, I already checked for that. These accounts weren't deleted. There'd be traces, archived pages, places where I'd be able to see where they used to be. But they're completely and totally gone, like they never existed." "So what are you saying?" Shan asked. What Winry was saying was this. Those online identities comprised of social media pages and electronic information and ethereal communication, those had all merged together to form 2 new personalities. Lynn Lahira of London and Phaedra Gutierrez of San Diego. At least that's what their online information said, but it wasn't true. Lynn wasn't really in London, and Phaedra wasn't really in San Diego. And they didn't really look the way they did in their profile pictures. They had never existed, not in the real world. And they didn't now. And yet here they were on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and no one could tell they didn't really walk the earth. Virtual mosaics. Things you should know about the Seekers. In general, attempts to copy gifts and give them to people who don't already have them haven't gone very well. There are usually side effects, like with organ transplants. They work, usually, but you don't want to get a transplant unless you need it. But there are some exceptions. Few things the Seekers have managed to rip off from folks like me, or rather, folks like my tiles. Take their memory storage and recall. The Seekers in the Burrow, if you ask them to recall something that happened or something they read, they'll do it. Perfectly. Every time. That's because all the full members, like Miranda and Winry, have the gift of perfect instantaneous recall. They apparently managed to isolate that one in the 1960s, and since then it's become a standard feature. That one comes without any noticeable side effects. Others, not so much. Take one Seeker named Antoine. He used to be some hotshot scientist, on the fast track to take Miranda's place when she stepped down. Then he got fixated on isolating one particular gift. He discovered a little girl with the ability to reverse entropy. She could make rotten fruit go ripe again. She could make broken objects reassemble themselves. In her presence, computers would become faster and more efficient with time, rather than slower and more run down. It wasn't the most visible gift. Mostly people just assumed she was an unusually tidy child. But Antoine became obsessed with her potential. Rumor around the Burrow was that he saw her ability as a way to eventually conquer death itself. No entropy means no decay. No decay means no death. But there was a problem. This little girl who violated the laws of physics, this child with unimaginable power, she would never be able to teach anyone else about her gift. She would never be able to learn a greater level of control. She would never truly understand what she did beyond a basic, instinctive level. And that's because this little girl, for all her gifts, had a brain injury that ensured she would never develop mentally past the age of 2. And so, convinced the most important gift in the history of the Seekers was going to waste, Antoine set about copying and mastering her ability for himself. I have no idea how they attempt these things. It involves genetic manipulation, engineered retroviruses, things I have no desire to understand. But Antoine tried it. It was a partial success. Antoine can make a dusty floor tidy, make spilled water flow back into a cup, reverse the gradual genetic damage that is human aging. But he also can't wear shoes anymore, since his toenail clippings have a tendency to reassemble themselves into 5-inch long prongs. He has to cover himself when he leaves the burrow, because the brand new skin of a baby simply doesn't look right on a grown man. He's had to have surgery several times because the food he ate reassembled itself in his stomach. He's not much use as a scientist, not anymore. But the Seekers take care of their own. He has his own room in the burrow, and Miranda takes him on walks, and all the others take turns checking in and bringing him broken things so he can use his power to put them back together. It makes him feel useful. No one knows if he'll ever be able to die. Winry spent some time doing her computer stuff, hacking or whatever. Whatever she did, she managed to find IP addresses of computers and social media accounts that had been interacting with our Mosaic accounts a lot. From there, she managed to get those people's names and physical addresses. And big surprise, these names were of people who hadn't been to work in weeks, people who had been reported missing. Once more into the breach, Miranda said, and Shan and I went off to figure out what was going on. Our first stop was at the apartment of a guy named Dean. Winry sent me a list of tweets and Facebook posts that had been linked to Lynn's social media accounts. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say the guy had a Confederate flag as his profile photo and the words "feminazi slut" came up more than once. By the time we reached his place, I was half hoping one of the Mosaics had found a way to climb through his computer monitor like that girl from The Ring and eat his face off. But no such luck. We got into the apartment and found it empty and tidy. No signs of violent death or struggle. There was one weird thing, though. His computer was missing. We found the desk and the bundle of cables where it originally would have been, but no monitor, no tower. We checked out Dean's work, too, but he hadn't been seen in a few days. He worked at a software company. That was part of a pattern, I noticed. Everyone on the list, everyone Lynn and Phaedra had been in conversation with, they were all computer engineers, software designers, people who worked in programming, and each house we checked, they were gone. No people, and no computers or phones left behind. I called Winry and asked her if she could track the phones of the people who were missing. She got back to me a few minutes later. Turns out one of them did have their phone on and could be tracked. And at that moment, they were in the basement of the computer science department of a local college. Shan and I spent a couple hours watching the place. We saw a few of the missing folks walking back and forth between a van and the building. The way they did it was weird, though. They always had their phones in one hand. Always. And they never watched where they were going. They always had their eyes locked right on those screens. I know that sounds like every asshole with a texting habit out there, but this was way beyond that. It was as though they physically couldn't put the phones away, even as they struggled to haul boxes and armfuls of computer equipment into the building. Shan tried to do some remote viewing, but they started cringing and whimpering after a few minutes. "Sorry," they said. "Too much electronics in there. Too much metal. It's painful." And then I noticed the rash breaking out on their arms and neck, like an allergic reaction. "Okay, stop," I said. "Stop trying. Tech is not your thing, clearly." Then I told Shan to stay outside, and before they could argue with me, I teleported my way into the building. It wasn't too precise, since I couldn't see the inside of the building, and my control still sucks. But I did happen to land in a deserted hallway, outside a door with a sign that read Computer Commons. I heard movement behind the door, people shuffling around, and the whir of a drill, and something heavy dropping to the ground. I went in, ready to slow time or pull water out of someone or whatever else I could do if they rushed me. But none of them looked up from their work. Their eyes stayed on their phones, most of which were resting on surfaces in front of them. But their hands worked on some kind of machine, some kind of metal tower in the middle of the room. I circled around to one side of it that was open. It was full of circuit boards, metal squares that looked like hard drives, wires and cables. It was like a really big desktop computer tower. But there were other things that didn't seem like they belonged on any computer. Like a slim, jointed, robotic arm sticking out of one side. Or a series of what looked like small cameras mounted to the top. I didn't have the slightest idea of what I was looking at, so I called Winry. "I think they might be building a Terminator," I said. She asked me to show her the machine, so I held up my phone and got as close as I could without touching any of the people working on it. Winry took one look at that machine and started making squeaking sounds. I took it for fear at first, but it turns out she was just excited. It took a while to get her to explain it in terms I understood, But finally I got that it wasn't a Terminator. So that was good news. No, it was actually a server. But not just any server, Winry assured me. An incredibly advanced server with new kinds of engineering she'd never seen on a computer before. Engineering that should have been way, way above the level of these missing engineers and programmers. I asked her about the other parts, the cameras and the robotic limbs. She said, well, this is just a guess, but it looks like when this thing is done, it'll be mobile and self-repairing. Basically, it'll be able to do everything by itself. Honestly, that sounded pretty Terminator to me, but I didn't see any weapons mounted on it, and Winry didn't think it seemed threatening, so I held off on smashing it. Instead, I peeked over the shoulder of one of the missing folks, a balding guy named Darren. What I saw on his phone screen didn't make a lot of sense to me. Fast, flashing images and colors. It all looked completely random. A deep green screen, then a picture of an apple, then the words, Elaine's gumbo recipe. And then, almost too fast for me to see, a brief set of instructions, followed by a string of code. I showed the screen to Winry, and she spent some time watching it and muttering to herself. At last she said, okay, here's what I think is going on. I think these images and words and things between the instructions are keyed to this particular guy. Like this one, Darren. His wife's name is Elaine. It keeps mentioning her. In theory, if you know enough about anyone's psychology and their past and experiences, you should be able to control them. I thought that sounded pretty creepy, but I shouldn't judge. I use mind control on people all the time. Still, mine's all natural. Organic, damn it. Even with all this information, though, Winry couldn't tell me what Lynn and Phaedra wanted. They're a collection of social media profiles, for fuck's sake. They shouldn't have been able to want anything. Winry spent some more time studying what was going on through my screen, but she couldn't make sense of it. I got impatient. Okay, I said, opening up Facebook. That's it. I'm asking them. I'm not sure you should do that, Winry said. Then Miranda jumped in. Apparently she'd been listening the whole time. Ren, do not reach out to those mosaics. Hear me? Have I mentioned that I don't like being told what to do? Miranda knows that, so she really shouldn't have been surprised when I ignored her and sent a message to Phaedra. I asked, what's the machine for? She responded instantly, without hesitation. The message on my screen said, we want a home, a body of our own. I didn't get it, but Winry gasped. Oh, of course. And then she told me what she'd figured out. Social media profiles, accounts, programs, they don't just float around in some weird space called the internet. They exist on servers owned by companies. Google, Facebook, Twitter. Those servers could get shut down or changed or destroyed at any time. And Lynn and Phaedra, they only existed on those servers. Those profiles were them. The closest thing they had to bodies existed on hard drive spaces that belonged to someone else. I suddenly understood why this server was so sturdy, why it had cameras to see and speakers to speak and arms to repair itself. They were about to migrate into their own home. Miranda must have figured this out at about the same time, because the next thing she said was, Ren, destroy that thing. We don't even know if they're planning anything, I said. My phone beeped. It was a text with one of Phaedra's profile pictures. We're not making a trumpet, the text said. We can't. We just want our own home. I told Miranda what it said. She didn't even hesitate. They might be lying, she said. If we can't take them in, we can't risk letting them go. You know what's at stake here, Ren. She was right. I did know what was at stake. I know what it means if someone manages to make a trumpet. But I just stood there with my phone, looking at Phaedra's Facebook page and then at Lynn's. They looked like normal women. They were smiling. They listed their favorite movies, favorite TV shows, like anyone else. They seemed like people living their lives, or wanting to. Miranda kept talking, but I tuned out. I stepped back and let the programmers finish the tower. They attached the last piece, sealed the tower with a big metal plate, and the second it was done, they all blinked and seemed to wake up. Darren shook his head. "What's going on?" he said. "How'd we get here?" I never got a chance to answer him because the tower started beeping and whirring. At the same time, I heard a low roar from outside, something in the sky. "Their profiles aren't on the old servers anymore," Winry said. "They migrated." Miranda cursed and yelled at me, but I kept ignoring her. As I watched, the entire tower started rolling its way across the computer lab. It used its robotic arm to open the door and make its way down the hall. I followed slowly behind it because the whole thing was too ridiculous not to watch. And also because I was wondering if the two mosaics now living in that ridiculous body were about to bring the world to an end. I wondered if that was the mechanical roar outside. But it wasn't. I saw what it was as soon as the tower rolled out the front door of the building. Because that was the moment a drone landed on the street outside. I don't mean one of those little hobbyist drones. I mean a military drone, as wide as the street outside, the kind that drops bombs on countries we don't like to think about too much. And that's when I realized that these missing people in this computer lab weren't the only ones Lynn and Phaedra had bewitched. Somewhere on a military base, there was a drone pilot who was about to get in a lot of trouble. But not yet. For now, the drone just waited there while the server latched onto its belly. And then it took off again, carrying Lynn and Phaedra away. A crowd of people gathered on the street, pointing and yelling and not sure whether to be impressed or terrified. I watched until it was out of sight. I realized Shan had reached me by then, was asking something. "Did they get away?" they asked. I held up my phone and asked Winry what was happening. She said nothing for a long moment, then, "I don't see any signs of anything weird happening. No sign of a trumpet. I think they were telling the truth. They just wanted to have their own body." Then Miranda's voice came over the phone. "Do you have any idea what a risk you just took?" she asked. "For all we knew, they could have made a trumpet. You could have ended everything." Then Miranda said, "If you ever become a threat, Ren, I'll put you down. I won't hesitate." "And if that happens, Miranda, you'll be the next to die," Shan said, in a voice only a complete idiot would ignore. Miranda didn't say anything for a minute. Then, "Come back to the burrow. We have another situation." And then she hung up. Shan and I stared at the phone for a minute. "Should we run?" they asked. "No," I said. "Miranda might try to end me one day, but not now." And at that moment, I couldn't get too worked up about the possibility of Miranda trying to kill me. I stared up at the sky and thought about Lynn and Phaedra living on their own terms in their strange way. I don't know where they'll end up. Some remote spot, I imagine, where they can roll their server into hiding and rely on solar power and repair themselves when they need. From there, I don't know what they'll do. Live online, I imagine. Facebook friends with thousands of people who don't know what they are, who think they're flesh and blood. My phone buzzed as Shan and I walked away from the crowd that had gathered to watch the drone. It was an alert from Twitter. 2 new followers, Lynn and Phaedra. Guess us mosaics have to stick together. Spines is a production of Zoom Doom Stories. It's narrated by Ren Jones, written by Jamie Killen, website and logos by Benjamin Pond. Produced by Jamie Killen and Benjamin Pond. You can support Spines by visiting patreon.com/Spines Podcast and by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. Spines is a member of Fate Crafters Studios. Find more great shows at fatecrafters.net. This week we recommend Rex Riveter, Private Eye. The year is 1955, Tinseltown, the land of make-believe. But there's a seedier side to the City of Angels, full of fancy dames and slick cons. Some folks call it noir or pulp fiction, but for a private eye named Rex Riveter, it's home. Catch up on Rex Riveter, Private Eye, a 1950s-style noir audio drama on iTunes, your favorite podcatcher, or dsentertain.com.